Hi, I'm Brooke, 28 years old, and I thought I had the perfect marriage until my mother-in-law decided to destroy it. For 3 years, I managed every single one of Margaret's bills through Autopay. I handled her mortgage, credit cards, utilities, streaming services, everything. I thought I was being helpful, building a relationship with my future family. Then one day she screamed at me to pack my things and get out of her son's life. So I did exactly what she asked. I packed my bags, walked out the door, and on my way out, I canceled every single auto pay I had ever set up for her. Before I tell you exactly how I got my perfect revenge, let me know in the comments where you're watching from today. If you're enjoying this story so far, please hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible true stories. Trust me, you won't believe what happened next when Margaret realized what I had done. Let me take you back to where this all began. 3 years ago, I was working as a marketing coordinator in downtown Austin, Texas. Life was good, predictable, maybe even a little boring. I had my routine, my small apartment, my weekend coffee shop visits. That's actually where I met Ryan. It was a typical Saturday morning in October. I was sitting at my usual corner table laptop open working on a campaign presentation when this guy approached me. Tall brown hair, nervous smile. He asked if he could borrow my phone charger, said his had died, and he was expecting an important call about a software project. Ryan was everything I thought I wanted. Stable job as a software engineer. Kind eyes, the type of guy who opened doors and remembered small details about our conversations. Our first date turned into a 6-hour marathon of talking, laughing, discovering we both loved hiking and hated cilantro. Within 8 months, we were living together in his 2-bedroom apartment near the university. Everything felt natural, easy. Ryan was thoughtful in ways my previous boyfriends never were. He'd surprise me with my favorite coffee, leave little notes on the bathroom mirror, never made me feel like I was asking for too much. 2 years later, he proposed during a weekend trip to Colorado. Down on one knee at sunrise overlooking the Rocky Mountains. I said yes, without hesitation. Finally, I thought I found my person. That's when Margaret entered the picture in a more significant way. I had met Ryan's mother briefly at family gatherings, but she lived about 40 minutes away, and we rarely spent extended time together. She seemed pleasant enough, a 62-year-old widow who had lost her husband 2 years earlier to a heart attack. She was always impeccably dressed, drove a luxury sedan, lived in a beautiful colonial-style house in an upscale neighborhood. After our engagement, Margaret insisted we have lunch together, just the two of us. She said she wanted to get to know her future daughter-in-law better. We met at an elegant bistro she chose, complete with white tablecloths and a wine list thicker than most books. During that lunch, Margaret opened up about how difficult things had been since her husband died. She talked about feeling overwhelmed by technology, how confusing online banking had become, how she missed having someone to help her manage the household finances. Her husband had handled everything for 40 years, she explained, and now she felt lost. My heart went out to her. Here was this woman trying to navigate life alone after decades of partnership. When she mentioned struggling to set up autopay for her bills, I volunteered immediately. It seemed like such a small thing, a way to help family and maybe earn some points with my future mother-in-law. That weekend, I spent 3 hours at Margaret's house setting up her financial systems. We went through each bill methodically. Electric company gas, company water and sewer trash service, her 3 credit cards, car payment, homeowner's insurance, even her streaming services, Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime. Margaret was incredibly grateful. She kept saying I was like the daughter she never had, how lucky Ryan was to have found someone so capable and caring. She insisted on making me dinner that night, called Ryan to tell him how wonderful I was. Ryan was relieved. He admitted he had been worried about his mother managing alone, but felt awkward offering to help with her finances. Having me step in solved a problem he didn't know how to address. He thanked me repeatedly, said it meant everything to him that his mother and I were bonding. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs I ignored. The way Margaret talked about managing Ryan's life when he was younger. How she mentioned she still had keys to his apartment and would sometimes stop by to check on things, even though we were both adults. The comments about how she hoped I would take good care of her boy, in a tone that suggested she wasn't entirely convinced I was up to the task. But I was so focused on being the perfect fiancée, the perfect future daughter-in-law. I wanted this family to love me the way they loved Ryan. So I brushed off the small comments, the subtle implications that maybe I wasn't quite what Margaret had envisioned for her son. The wedding planning began in earnest that winter. Margaret immediately insisted on being involved in every decision. She wanted to contribute financially, which seemed generous at first. But her contributions came with strings attached. If she paid for the flowers, she got to choose the arrangements. If she covered the reception venue, she had final approval on the menu. I should have seen the control patterns forming. But I was caught up in the excitement of planning my dream wedding, grateful for the financial help, and determined to keep peace in the family. Everything started shifting about 6 months before our wedding date. The changes were subtle at first, like storm clouds gathering on a distant horizon. Margaret began making small comments about my choices. Nothing overtly cruel, but pointed observations that left me feeling unsettled. She'd look at my engagement photos and suggest I might want to consider a different hairstylist for the wedding. She'd ask about my career plans with a tone that implied she found my ambitions somehow inappropriate. The real red flag came during a family dinner at Margaret's house. We were discussing wedding details when she casually mentioned that she thought I should consider leaving my job after marriage. "Ryan makes excellent money," she said, cutting her steak with precise movements. "A good wife should focus on making a proper home, not chasing after some career that takes time away from her husband." I laughed it off, thinking she was joking. But Margaret's expression remained serious. "I'm quite concerned about modern women today," she continued. "They seem to think they can have everything, but marriage requires sacrifice. Priorities." Ryan shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but said nothing. When I tried to explain how much I loved my work in marketing, how I had goals for advancement, Margaret just smiled tightly and changed the subject. That night driving home, I brought up my concerns with Ryan. "Your mom seems to have some pretty traditional ideas about marriage," I said carefully. Ryan sighed. "She's just old-fashioned. She means well. Mom's been through a lot since Dad died, and she's trying to look out for us in her own way. Maybe just be patient with her." Patient. That word would echo in my head over the coming months as Margaret's behavior escalated. The next request came 2 weeks later. Margaret called me at work, something she had never done before. She was having trouble with online shopping, she explained. Could I possibly add a few more things to the Autopay system I had set up? Her gym membership at the country club, her weekly grocery delivery service, a couple of subscription boxes she enjoyed. It seemed harmless enough. 15 more minutes of setting up automatic payments. I did it that same evening, adding the new bills to her existing autopay arrangements. But then the phone calls started. Multiple times a day, Margaret would call with various requests. Could I check if her grocery delivery had been scheduled correctly? Could I verify that her gym membership was still active? Could I call the electric company about a billing question she had? I found myself becoming Margaret's personal assistant, handling tasks that had nothing to do with the autopay system I had originally set up. When I mentioned to Ryan that his mother was calling me quite frequently, he just said she was probably lonely and appreciated having someone to talk to. The boundary testing escalated during our engagement party in March. Margaret had insisted on hosting it at her house, which seemed generous. But on the day of the party, everything went wrong in small, deliberate ways. Margaret had rearranged the living room furniture without telling me, so the setup I had planned for photos looked awkward. She had ordered different appetizers than what we had discussed, claiming the catering company had made a mistake. She introduced me to Ryan's extended family with subtle digs disguised as compliments. "This is Brooke," she would say. "She's quite ambitious with her little marketing job." I keep telling Ryan how lucky he is to find someone so modern. The worst moment came when Ryan's Aunt Patricia asked about my bridesmaids. I began describing my three closest friends, women I had known for years, when Margaret interrupted. "Oh, I do hope Brooke chooses appropriate girls," Margaret said with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Some of the people she associates with seem rather unconventional. Not quite the image we want for the wedding photos, if you know what I mean." I felt heat rise to my cheeks. My friends were accomplished, intelligent women. My maid of honor, Jessica, was a nurse practitioner. Another bridesmaid, Amanda, was a teacher. The third, Sarah, worked in nonprofit management. But Margaret had managed to make them sound like they were somehow beneath her standards. Ryan was across the room talking to his uncle when this happened. By the time I could pull him aside to tell him what his mother had said, the moment had passed, and bringing it up just made me look like I was causing drama at our own engagement party. That night I called Jessica in tears. "I feel like I'm walking on eggshells all the time," I told her. "Nothing I do is ever quite right for her." Jessica listened patiently, then asked the question I wasn't ready to face. "What does Ryan say when you talk to him about this?" The truth was, Ryan kept asking me to be understanding, to give his mother time to adjust. He genuinely seemed to believe that Margaret was just protective and would come around eventually. But I was beginning to suspect that Margaret didn't want to come around. I was starting to think she wanted me gone. Spring turned to summer, and Margaret's manipulation tactics became impossible to ignore. With 3 months until our October wedding, her behavior shifted from passive-aggressive to overtly controlling. The wedding dress incident was my first real wake-up call. I had scheduled my final fitting on a Tuesday afternoon, taking time off work to make sure everything was perfect. I was standing on the platform in the bridal shop, admiring how beautiful the alterations looked, when Margaret walked in unannounced. "Surprise," she called out cheerfully. "I thought I'd stop by to see how everything looks." I hadn't invited her to this fitting. We had specifically planned for her to see the dress on the wedding day. But there she was, and backing out now would have caused a scene in front of the seamstress. Margaret circled me like a shark, pointing out perceived flaws. The neckline was too low. The silhouette was too form-fitting. The length needed adjusting. She spoke to the seamstress as if I wasn't there, suggesting changes that would completely alter the design I loved. "We want something more appropriate," Margaret said, her voice carrying that false sweetness I was learning to recognize. "More elegant, less revealing." I stood there in my dream dress, watching this woman tear apart every choice I had made, and felt tears starting to well up. The seamstress looked uncomfortable, but clearly didn't know whose opinion she should prioritize. "Actually," I said, finding my voice, "I love the dress exactly as it is." Margaret's smile faltered for just a moment. "Oh dear. Well, I suppose if you're comfortable with that look." She let the sentence hang in the air, heavy with judgment. I left the bridal shop feeling defeated instead of excited. My perfect dress suddenly felt like a source of anxiety instead of joy. The financial manipulation was becoming more complex too. Margaret had asked me to add her mortgage payment to the Autopay system, claiming she was worried about missing such an important bill. Then came her investment account transfers, her homeowners association fees, even her monthly charitable contributions. By this point, I was managing nearly 20 different autopay arrangements for Margaret. I had access to her checking account, her savings account, 3 credit cards. I could see every transaction, every balance. And what I was seeing didn't quite make sense. Margaret lived in an expensive house, drove a luxury car, belonged to an exclusive country club, wore designer clothes. But her account balances were lower than I expected for someone with that lifestyle. Her credit card balances were higher than seemed reasonable. Several times I had to call her to let her know an autopay was going to overdraw her checking account. When I mentioned these concerns to Ryan, he brushed them off. "Mom's always been a little disorganized with money," he said. "That's why it's so great that you're helping her stay on top of everything." But I was starting to wonder if the help was flowing in the wrong direction. Was Margaret actually struggling financially and using me to manage a house of cards that was barely staying upright? The health scares started in August. Anytime I pushed back against one of Margaret's requests or suggestions, she would suddenly develop symptoms that required Ryan's immediate attention. Chest pains that turned out to be heartburn, dizziness that resolved as soon as Ryan arrived, falls that left no bruises. Each incident followed the same pattern. Margaret would call Ryan in distress. He would rush to her house, and by the time he arrived, the crisis had mysteriously improved. But Ryan would spend hours there anyway, missing our dinner plans or date nights. "She's been through so much," he would explain afterward. "I can't risk ignoring something serious." I understood his concern, but the timing of these emergencies was becoming suspicious. They always seemed to happen right after I had disagreed with Margaret about something wedding-related or pushed back against one of her demands. The isolation tactics were subtle but effective. Margaret would make seemingly innocent comments about my friends and family that planted seeds of doubt. Jessica was a bad influence because she was divorced. My parents were lovely people, but perhaps not quite sophisticated enough for certain wedding events. My brother was struggling because he worked in construction rather than a white-collar profession. None of these comments were outright attacks, but they accumulated like poison drops, making me question my relationships and my own judgment. Margaret had a gift for making criticism sound like concern for delivering insults wrapped in silk. Ryan was changing too. The man who used to defend me automatically now asked me to consider Margaret's perspective first. When conflicts arose, he would suggest compromises that somehow always involved me giving up something I wanted. "Can't you just wear a different dress?" he asked after the bridal shop incident. "It would make Mom happy, and it's just one day." But it wasn't just one day. It was my wedding day. And the dress was just one item in a growing list of things Margaret wanted me to change about myself, my choices, my life. 2 weeks before the wedding, Margaret dropped her biggest bomb yet. She wanted Ryan and me to move in with her after the honeymoon, just temporarily, while we saved money for a house. She had already cleared out the guest room and started referring to it as Ryan's old room. When I objected, Margaret looked hurt. "I just thought it would be nice to have family close," she said. "But if you'd prefer to struggle financially instead of accepting help." The way she framed it made me sound selfish and ungrateful. But the thought of living under Margaret's roof subject to her daily oversight and control filled me with dread. That's when I realized I wasn't just marrying Ryan. I was marrying into Margaret's vision of what our life should look like. And in that vision, I was not a partner or an equal. I was an accessory expected to smile prettily and follow instructions. The final confrontation came exactly 1 week before our wedding date. Margaret called on Sunday morning, her voice unusually formal. "I need you and Ryan to come over today," she said. "There are some important things we need to discuss before the wedding." Something in her tone made my stomach drop. This wasn't a casual family dinner or wedding planning session. This felt like a summons. When Ryan and I arrived at Margaret's house that afternoon, I immediately noticed we weren't alone. Patricia, Ryan's aunt, was there with her husband Dave. They were sitting in the living room like a tribunal, faces serious, clearly having discussed something before our arrival. "Please sit down," Margaret said, gesturing to the couch, across from where the three of them had positioned themselves. The seating arrangement felt deliberately confrontational, us versus them. Margaret began what felt like a prepared speech. She talked about family values, about the importance of understanding one's place in the family structure, about concerns that had been raised about my suitability as Ryan's wife. "We've all been watching," Patricia chimed in, "and frankly we're worried about some of the patterns we're seeing." My heart started racing. "What patterns?" Dave cleared his throat. "Your attitude toward family obligations, for one. The way you seem to resent helping Margaret with simple tasks that any decent daughter-in-law would be happy to handle." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I've been managing Margaret's entire financial life for months. I handle 20 different autopay accounts for her. How is that resentful? "It's not about what you do," Margaret said coldly. It's about your attitude while doing it. The complaints, the resistance, the way you make it clear that you consider it beneath you. This was gaslighting at its finest. Margaret had been telling Ryan that I complained about helping her, twisting my legitimate concerns about boundaries into evidence of my poor character. Margaret stood up and walked to a side table where she had a folder waiting. I've been doing some research into your background, Brooke, your family's financial situation, your career prospects, your social connections. She opened the folder and began reading from what appeared to be notes she had compiled. Details about my parents' middle-class lifestyle, my student loans, my salary at the marketing firm. Information that felt invasive and humiliating to have laid out like evidence in a court case. The truth is, Margaret continued, you're marrying up significantly. Ryan comes from a family with means, with social standing, with expectations. I'm not convinced you understand what that requires. Patricia nodded along. We've seen girls like you before. You meet a nice man with a good family and you think you've hit the lottery. But marriage isn't just about love. It's about compatibility, about shared values, about knowing your role. I looked at Ryan, waiting for him to defend me, to shut this down, to stand up for the woman he claimed to love. But he was staring at his hands, silent. What exactly are you asking of me? I said finally. Margaret returned to her seat and leaned forward. I've had a prenuptial agreement drawn up. Very standard, really. It protects the family assets in case things don't work out. It also outlines certain expectations for behavior, for participation in family decisions, for your role as Ryan's wife. She slid a thick document across the coffee table toward me. I could see bullet points on the first page, restrictions and requirements that would govern my life after marriage. Additionally, Margaret continued, I think monthly family meetings would be beneficial. A chance for us to address any concerns to make sure everyone is fulfilling their obligations appropriately. The room fell silent. I realized they were all watching me, waiting for my response. This whole scene had been orchestrated, planned, designed to corner me into submission. I thought about the past year of manipulation, the gradual erosion of my boundaries, the way my concerns had been dismissed, and my character had been attacked. I thought about the man I loved sitting silently while his family dismantled my worth as a human being. No, I said quietly. Margaret's eyebrows rose. Excuse me. No, I won't sign a prenuptial agreement that treats me like an employee instead of a wife. I won't submit to monthly evaluations of my behavior. I won't accept being spoken to like I'm some gold digger who tricked your son into proposing. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Margaret's composure cracked slightly, showing the steel underneath. Then perhaps, she said, her voice rising, you need to reconsider whether this marriage is right for you. Perhaps you need to think about whether you're really the kind of woman Ryan needs as a partner. I stood up, my own anger finally breaking through months of trying to keep the peace. Perhaps you need to consider whether you're the kind of mother-in-law who destroys her son's relationships because she can't let go of control. That's when Margaret exploded. She shot to her feet, her face flushed with rage, all pretense of civility abandoned. How dare you! She screamed. After everything I've done for you, after all the help I've given you, after welcoming you into this family despite your obvious shortcomings, if you can't appreciate what you have here, if you can't show proper respect and gratitude, then maybe you should pack your things and get out of my son's life. The words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Patricia and Dave looked shocked at Margaret's outburst, but not shocked enough to intervene. And Ryan finally looked up from his hands, but instead of rushing to comfort me or defend our relationship, he looked at his mother with something that resembled relief. In that moment, I understood everything. This confrontation wasn't about convincing me to stay. It was about giving Ryan permission to let me go. Margaret had orchestrated this whole scene to end our relationship in a way that would make it look like my choice, my fault, my failure. I looked around the room at these people who had spent the afternoon systematically tearing apart my character and my worth. I thought about the wedding that was supposed to happen in 7 days, the life I had planned with a man who couldn't even speak up for me when it mattered most. and then I smiled. "You know what, Margaret?" I said, my voice perfectly calm. "You're absolutely right. I should pack my things." The silence that followed my agreement was deafening. Margaret had clearly expected tears, begging maybe a dramatic breakdown that would confirm her narrative about my emotional instability. Patricia and Dave looked uncomfortable, as if they hadn't anticipated the confrontation would escalate to this point. But it was Ryan's expression that told me everything I needed to know. He looked relieved, actually relieved that his mother had just ended our relationship for him. "Good," Margaret said, though she sounded slightly unsure now that she had gotten what she wanted. "I think that's the mature decision." I picked up my purse and stood up with as much dignity as I could muster. "I'll get my things from Ryan's apartment tonight." Ryan finally spoke. "Brooke, maybe we should talk about this." "What's left to talk about?" I asked. "You've sat here for the past hour while your family explained why I'm not good enough for you. You haven't defended me once. You haven't contradicted a single thing they've said. I think your silence speaks pretty clearly." I walked toward the door, then turned back one last time. "Margaret, thank you for showing me who you really are, and who your son really is. Better to find out now than after the wedding." The drive back to Ryan's apartment was surreal. I felt oddly calm, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart instead of my own. The radio was playing some cheerful pop song that seemed absurdly inappropriate for the moment. At the apartment, I moved methodically. I had accumulated quite a bit of stuff over the 3 years we had been together, but I was determined to take only what was truly mine. Clothes books, a few pieces of furniture I had brought into the relationship photos of my family and friends. While I was packing my bedroom, I found the folder where Ryan kept important documents. Mixed in with insurance papers and tax returns was a collection of Margaret's financial information. Bills, account statements, the paperwork I had used to set up all those auto-pay arrangements. That's when I discovered the true scope of Margaret's financial situation. And it was worse than I had imagined. Her mortgage was 3 months behind. Her credit cards were maxed out with minimum payments that were barely being met. She owed back taxes. Her country club membership fees were delinquent. The luxury lifestyle she maintained was completely dependent on credit and delayed payments. I realized that Margaret hadn't just been using me for convenience. She had been using me to manage a financial house of cards that was ready to collapse. The Autopay system I had set up was the only thing preventing her from defaulting on multiple obligations simultaneously. As I sat on the bedroom floor surrounded by moving boxes and Margaret's financial chaos, a plan began to form in my mind. Margaret had told me to pack my things and get out of her son's life. She was about to learn that actions have consequences. I spent the next 2 hours methodically photographing every document, every account number, every autopay confirmation I had ever set up. I made detailed notes about which bills were paid, when which accounts had overdraft protection, which services would be immediately suspended if payments were missed. Then I began the most satisfying work I had ever done in my life. I started with the small things: Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, Spotify. Click, click, click. Autopay canceled. Margaret's evening entertainment was about to get a lot more limited. Next came the gym membership at her precious country club, the meal delivery service she bragged about to her friends, the subscription boxes that made her feel special when they arrived each month. All gone. I moved on to the utilities: electric company, natural gas, water, and sewer trash service. I didn't cancel the services, just the autopay arrangements. Margaret would start getting bills in the mail again, bills she would need to figure out how to pay manually. The credit card autopays were next. 3 different cards, each set up to make minimum payments automatically. Without these, Margaret would start missing payments within weeks, tanking her credit score and triggering late fees. But the big ones were still coming: her car payment, her homeowner's insurance, and finally, the mortgage payment that was already 3 months behind. I saved that one for last, staring at the screen for a long moment before clicking Cancel Autopay. Margaret's house, the symbol of her superior status, was now one missed payment away from foreclosure proceedings. As I finished the last cancellation, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and fear. What I was doing was completely legal. I had set up these accounts with Margaret's permission, using information she had freely given me. I had every right to remove my involvement from her financial management, but I also knew the consequences would be severe. Margaret was about to face the reality of her financial situation without any buffer or assistance. The crash was going to be spectacular. I changed all my banking passwords, removed Margaret's contact information from my accounts, and deleted every trace of our financial connection. Then I loaded my car with boxes and drove away from the apartment I had shared with Ryan. My phone started ringing before I even reached my new temporary apartment. Margaret's name appeared on the screen, but I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again, and again. By the time I had carried the last box upstairs, I had 17 missed calls from Margaret and 4 from Ryan. The voicemails started apologetic, but quickly escalated to angry, then desperate. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat down in my empty living room, and finally listened to the messages. "Brooke, honey, I think we may have gotten a little heated today. Perhaps we can discuss this more calmly. Brooke, this is ridiculous. You need to call me back immediately. Something's wrong with my Netflix, and my Amazon Prime isn't working. I don't understand what's happening. Brooke, I know you're getting these messages. Whatever you've done, you need to fix it right now." The final message was Ryan's voice, tight with stress. "Brooke, please call me back. Mom is having some kind of breakdown. Her accounts are all messed up, and she thinks you did something to them. Just, please call me." I deleted all the messages without responding. Margaret had told me to get out of her son's life, and that's exactly what I was doing. Completely. The first few days after what I started thinking of as the Great Cancellation were oddly peaceful. I had taken the week off work, originally planning to handle last-minute wedding preparations. Instead, I used the time to set up my new apartment and begin the process of untangling my life from Ryan's. My phone continued ringing constantly. Margaret called 23 times on the first day alone, leaving increasingly frantic voicemails. Ryan called repeatedly too, alternating between trying to convince me to work things out and demanding that I fix whatever you did to Mom's accounts. I blocked both of their numbers after the second day. The first real consequence hit on day 3. Margaret's streaming services had been suspended for non-payment. I found out because my friend Jessica texted me a screenshot of Margaret's Facebook post. "Can anyone recommend a good tech support service? My television account seemed to have malfunctioned." The comments on the post were telling. Several of Margaret's friends offered to help, but a few seemed confused about why someone Margaret's age couldn't simply call the companies directly to resolve billing issues. By the end of the first week, the consequences were cascading. Margaret's gym membership at the exclusive country club was suspended. I learned this through the neighborhood gossip network. Apparently, Margaret had shown up for her regular water aerobics class, only to be informed at the front desk that her membership had lapsed. The embarrassment was exactly what Margaret deserved. For months, she had used her country club membership as a symbol of her superior social status. Now she was being turned away at the door in front of people she had been trying to impress. Ryan appeared at my apartment on day 8 looking haggard and desperate. I almost didn't let him in, but curiosity got the better of me. "Brooke, you have to help me," he said immediately. "Mom's having a complete breakdown. Her mortgage payment didn't go through, she's getting disconnect notices for her utilities. Her credit cards are sending late payment warnings." I looked at this man I had planned to marry just 2 weeks earlier. And what do you mean, and? You set up all those accounts. You know how to fix this." "Ryan," I said calmly, "your mother told me to pack my things and get out of your life. So I did. I packed my things, got out of your life, and removed myself from all of your mother's financial arrangements. But she didn't mean what? She didn't mean the words that came out of her mouth. She didn't mean the hour-long attack on my character and background. She didn't mean the demands that I sign a prenuptial agreement treating me like an employee. Ryan ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I used to find endearing, but now just irritated me. Look, I know Mom can be difficult, but this is serious. She might lose her house. Then maybe she should have thought about that before she decided to destroy our relationship. You're being vindictive. The accusation stung because it was partially true, but it was also justified. I'm being exactly what your mother asked me to be. Gone. Ryan spent another 20 minutes trying to convince me to help to be the bigger person, to consider his mother's age and recent widowhood. But I had spent a year being the bigger person, accommodating Margaret's demands, swallowing my pride, making excuses for behavior that was inexcusable. Ryan, I said finally, let me ask you something. In that room when your mother and aunt and uncle were tearing me apart, when they were questioning my worth as a person, and your partner, why didn't you defend me? He was quiet for a long moment. I thought it was better to let everyone get their feelings out. Their feelings? What about my feelings? I was trying to keep the peace. By sacrificing me. He didn't have an answer for that because there wasn't one. Ryan had chosen his mother over me long before that final confrontation. The scene in Margaret's living room had just made it official. After Ryan left, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and liberation. The relationship was truly over, and I was also free from the constant stress of trying to manage Margaret's manipulation and Ryan's inability to stand up to her. Meanwhile, Margaret's situation was deteriorating rapidly. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard that she had been forced to hire a financial consultant to help her understand her accounts. The consultant had apparently delivered some harsh truths about her spending habits and debt levels. The mortgage situation was becoming critical. Margaret's house had been beautiful but expensive, purchased during better financial times with her late husband. The payments were substantial, and with her existing debt load, Margaret couldn't afford to maintain both the house and her lifestyle. Her friends were beginning to notice the changes. The weekly lunch dates at expensive restaurants stopped. The lavish holiday parties she usually hosted were quietly canceled. Margaret's carefully maintained image of prosperity was cracking. 3 weeks after the cancellation, I received an unexpected visitor. Patricia, Ryan's aunt, appeared at my door looking uncomfortable and slightly embarrassed. I owe you an apology, she said immediately. I didn't understand the full situation when we had that meeting at Margaret's house. I invited her in, curious about what had changed her perspective. Margaret asked Dave and me to help her with some bills, Patricia explained. That's when we discovered how bad her financial situation really is. She's been living on credit for years, barely keeping her head above water. The only thing that was keeping her from defaulting on everything was the system you had set up. Patricia paused, looking ashamed. We also found out that Margaret had been exaggerating some things about you. The complaints, the attitude problems she claimed you had. When we asked Ryan about specific incidents, he couldn't actually confirm most of what his mother had told us. So you're saying Margaret lied? I'm saying Margaret sees what she wants to see and hears what she wants to hear. She was so determined to find fault with you that she created problems where none existed. Patricia went on to explain that Margaret's financial crisis had revealed other issues too. The health scares, that always seemed to happen at convenient times, had stopped completely once Margaret became focused on her real problems. The dramatic helplessness about technology and banking had mysteriously disappeared when her survival depended on figuring things out herself. She's managing her own accounts now, Patricia said. Turns out, she's perfectly capable of online banking and autopay setup. She just preferred having someone else handle the responsibility. I wasn't entirely surprised by this revelation. Margaret had always struck me as more capable than she pretended to be. The helpless widow routine had been at least partially an act designed to keep people engaged in helping her. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Patricia sighed. Because I feel terrible about how we treated you. You were trying to help family and we made you feel like you were somehow inadequate or ungrateful. That wasn't fair. She paused, then added, "Also because Ryan is miserable. He knows he made the wrong choice, but he's too proud to admit it. And Margaret, well, Margaret is learning some hard lessons about the consequences of her behavior." I appreciated Patricia's apology, but it didn't change anything fundamental. The damage had been done. Even if Ryan came crawling back, even if Margaret suddenly became the perfect mother-in-law, I had seen their true colors when the pressure was on. "I'm glad you understand the situation better now," I told Patricia. "But what's done is done. Margaret got exactly what she asked for when she told me to leave. I'm just sorry it took a financial crisis for everyone to realize that I was actually helping, not hurting." After Patricia left, I reflected on how dramatically everyone's perspective had shifted once the consequences became real. When Margaret's lifestyle was threatened suddenly, my contributions became visible and valuable. When Ryan had to deal with his mother's crisis alone, suddenly my presence became missed. But it was too late for recognition. I had learned too much about who these people really were when they thought they held all the power. 3 months had passed since what I now called Margaret's Meltdown Monday, and I was settling into a new rhythm of life. The initial satisfaction of watching Margaret's world crumble had faded into something more complex. I didn't take pleasure in her suffering, but I felt no regret about my actions either. The consequences for Margaret had been swift and severe. Within 6 weeks of losing her Autopay safety net, she had been forced to put her house on the market. The mortgage arrears, combined with her existing debt load, made it impossible to maintain the expensive property. I learned through the neighborhood gossip network that Margaret had moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment across town. She'd had to sell most of her furniture to fit into the smaller space, and her luxury sedan had been replaced with a practical used car. More significantly, Margaret had been forced to take a part-time job for the first time in over 20 years. At 62, she was working at a local boutique helping customers and managing inventory. The woman who had lectured me about knowing my place was now learning about her own place in the economic hierarchy. Ryan had tried to help his mother financially, but his software engineer salary could only stretch so far. I heard he'd taken out a personal loan to help cover some of Margaret's debt consolidation, putting his own financial future at risk. The stress had taken a toll on their relationship, too. Margaret's financial irresponsibility had been hidden from Ryan for years, protected by the management system I had unknowingly provided. Now that everything was out in the open, Ryan was grappling with the reality that his mother had been living a lie. Several of Margaret's country club friends had reached out to me, curious about what had really happened. The story Margaret was telling painted her as a victim of my vindictiveness, but the timeline didn't quite add up for people who paid attention. "We always wondered how Margaret afforded that lifestyle," one woman confided during a chance encounter at the grocery store. "Her husband left some insurance money, but not enough to support that house and all her spending. It makes more sense now that we know someone was helping her manage everything." The truth was slowly emerging in their social circle. Margaret hadn't been the financially sophisticated widow she had pretended to be. She had been barely keeping her head above water, dependent on my organizational skills and Ryan's emotional support to maintain an illusion of prosperity. My own life was transforming in ways I hadn't expected. Without the constant drama and stress of managing Margaret's demands, I had energy for things I had forgotten I enjoyed. I rejoined the hiking group I had abandoned when Margaret started monopolizing my weekends. I took a painting class. I read books for pleasure again. Work was going better too. Without Margaret's daily interruptions and crisis calls, I could focus completely on my projects. My supervisor noticed the improvement in my performance, and I received a promotion with a significant salary increase. The promotion came with an interesting opportunity. The marketing firm was expanding into the Denver market, and they needed someone to head up the new office. The job would mean relocating, but it also represented a major step forward in my career. I was seriously considering the Denver position when Ryan reappeared in my life. 4 months after our relationship ended, he showed up at my apartment again, and this time, he looked different. Humbled. Uncertain. I've been going to therapy, he said without preamble, trying to understand how everything went so wrong. I let him in but didn't offer coffee or any other gesture of hospitality. We were past those courtesies. I've learned some things about myself that I didn't want to face, Ryan continued. About how I handled conflict about my relationship with my mother, about the way I failed you when you needed me to stand up for us. He went on to explain what therapy had revealed about his family dynamics. Margaret had always been controlling, but after his father died, her need for control had intensified. Ryan had fallen into the role of emotional support system, prioritizing his mother's needs over everyone else's, including his own. I realize now that I wasn't ready to be married, Ryan said. I was still too enmeshed with my mother to be a real partner to anyone. It was the first time Ryan had ever acknowledged that the problem wasn't my attitude or behavior, but the dysfunctional dynamic between him and Margaret. The therapist helped me see that what happened in Mom's living room wasn't about you not being good enough for our family. It was about Mom being terrified of losing control over me and me being too weak to set appropriate boundaries. I listened to Ryan's revelations with a mixture of sadness and vindication. Everything I had tried to explain to him during our relationship, he was now learning from a professional therapist. I know I have no right to ask this, Ryan said finally, but I'm wondering if there's any chance we could try again. I'm different now. I understand things I didn't understand before. I looked at this man I had once planned to spend my life with. He seemed genuinely changed, more self-aware, willing to take responsibility for his role in our relationship's failure. But understanding and growth couldn't undo the fundamental breach of trust that had occurred. Ryan, I said gently, I'm glad you're in therapy. I'm glad you're learning about yourself and working on these issues, but I can't unknow what I learned about you when the pressure was on. He nodded, tears forming in his eyes. I know I hurt you. I know I failed you when you needed me most. It's not just that you failed me, I explained. It's that when your mother was systematically attacking my character and my worth as a person, you sat there and let it happen. You were relieved when she ended our relationship for you. Ryan couldn't deny it because it was true. In that crucial moment, he had chosen the path of least resistance over defending the woman he claimed to love. People can change, he said quietly. Maybe they can. But I've changed too. I've remembered who I am when I'm not constantly trying to manage someone else's dysfunction. I've rediscovered what it feels like to be in relationships where I'm valued and respected from the beginning, not just after a crisis forces people to recognize my worth. I told Ryan about the job opportunity in Denver, about the new life I was building. The conversation was sad but not bitter. We had both learned important lessons from our failed relationship, even if those lessons had come at a high price. After Ryan left, I made the decision to accept the Denver position. It felt like the right time for a complete fresh start, away from all the complicated history and expectations of Austin. My last week in Texas was filled with goodbye dinners and farewell gatherings. Jessica threw me a going-away party, joking that I was escaping to the mountains like a wise hermit who had learned the secrets of life. You know what I'm most proud of, Jessica said during her toast. You figured out the difference between helping someone and enabling their worst impulses. That's a lesson a lot of people never learn. She was right. For months I had thought I was being kind and supportive by managing Margaret's financial chaos. But I had actually been enabling her to avoid facing the consequences of her poor choices and manipulative behavior. The real kindness had been stepping back and forcing Margaret to confront reality. It wasn't pleasant for anyone involved, but it was honest in a way that my previous help had never been. On my last day in Austin, I drove past Margaret's old neighborhood. The house had sold quickly to a young family with children. I could see toys in the yard, bikes on the porch, signs of life and happiness that had been missing during Margaret's residence. I hoped Margaret was learning to find contentment in her smaller life, that she was discovering that happiness didn't require expensive trappings or control over other people's choices. I hoped Ryan was continuing his therapy and building healthier relationships. but mostly I was excited about my own future. Denver represented possibility, adventure, the chance to apply everything I had learned about boundaries and self-respect. As I drove west toward my new life, I reflected on the final lesson of this whole experience. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop protecting them from the consequences of their actions. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from people who can't see your value until you're gone. Margaret had told me to pack my things and get out of her son's life. In doing exactly what she asked, I had discovered my own strength, my own worth, and my own capacity for creating the life I actually wanted rather than the life others expected me to accept. The mountains appeared on the horizon as the sun began to set, and I smiled at the metaphor. Every ending really was a new beginning as long as you had the courage to keep moving forward. I hope my story resonates with some of you watching today. Have you ever been in a relationship where you felt like you were giving more than you were receiving? Have you ever had to make the difficult choice between keeping the peace and standing up for yourself? I'd love to hear about your experiences in the comments below. If this story touched you or made you think about your own relationships differently, please hit that like button and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe for more true stories about finding strength in difficult situations and learning to value yourself enough to walk away from people who don't appreciate you. Remember, you teach people how to treat you by what you're willing to accept. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply stop accepting behavior that doesn't serve your highest good. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you all the courage to create relationships built on mutual respect and genuine love.